I'm glad they gave you some sugar in between the talks. There have been some fantastic panels, and I've been taking notes all day long. There are so many things that people said that are great segues to what I want to talk to you about. So what I'd like to do in the next half hour or so is tell you how I got from where you're sitting today to where I'm standing right now. And also onto that video that you saw. If you were here at the beginning of the day, you saw a video about a program called Whitney. And so we'll come back to that at the end of what I have to say, okay? So I want to focus on not just what my journey from a career perspective has been, but my leadership journey. And hopefully share with you the things that I've learned along the way. One, by experience, School of Hard Knocks, as you try to take on a leadership role. Two, by learning from the experts, and there are some brilliant thinkers about leadership. And three, just by osmosis, just by watching other fantastic leaders and seeing what works and what doesn't. So here's a 30-year career in about 30 seconds. And then we'll come back to various aspects of it that I want to talk about. So when I was sitting approximately where you're sitting, maybe a little bit younger, I was headed off to college. I wanted to be an elementary school teacher, not surprisingly because my mother was an elementary school teacher. So that made sense. I went off to undergraduate school. Within very short order, changed my mind and decided that I wanted to major in speech pathology and audiology, which I did. Went and got a master's degree at a place that was also a residential school for the deaf. Worked as an audiologist for a little bit, changed my mind again, realized that I was more interested in the science of speech and hearing sciences than the actual practice of it. Went back to school, got my PhD actually at the CUNY Graduate Center. Taught at Hunter and Queens College, got married along the way. As a matter of fact, I have the unique distinction of having defended my dissertation and got married within the same week. So my good friend made a toast at our wedding saying I was the only person she knew who got my PhD and my MRS in the same week. While I was waiting for a faculty position to open up in New York, I took a job at a new science and technology center that was opening up with a telephone company called 9X that I imagine most of the people in the room have never heard of, but it is the predecessor company to what you now know as Verizon. I got promoted into management a bunch of times and ended up as the CIO for the enterprise business unit, running an organization with about 7,000 people, managing a budget of about $1 billion. So that was an interesting journey, which we'll go back over. And then in the last couple of years, I suddenly sort of picked my head up from trying to get stuff done and looked around the room and thought, where are all the women? Where are all the women in tech? And in particular, when you're in a leadership role, you're looking down into the pipeline to say, who can we promote next? Who's going to come up behind me? And was really sort of horrified at the small number of women that there were in the pipeline. So I started to ask myself, well, what is Verizon, a Fortune 10 or Fortune 15 company, what is a company like Verizon doing about this problem? And then, of course, it occurred to me to ask, what am I doing about this problem? I'm the senior most woman in IT in a company as large as Verizon. What am I doing to try to help solve this problem other than volunteering at this thing and that thing? And so we'll come full circle to the program you heard about at the beginning, which was called Whitney, and we'll talk about that. But I didn't just sort of slide my way, through these 30 years. I got nudged in various places, and I think it's worth mentioning because it was a hugely important lesson for me that I like to share with others. Those little pink things, anybody know what they're supposed to be? Mirrors, very good, thank you. So I was in high school in 11th grade math, and my math teacher, Mr. Lavarando, I raised my hand one day and answered a question. He said, that was just a fantastic answer. Nobody's ever answered that question correctly. And I'm absolutely positive that Mr. Labrando never thought about that comment again for the rest of his life, that I never forgot. I'm sitting here now, 30, 40 years later, and I remember him, and I remember that comment. Because it was the first time it had ever actually occurred to me that maybe I could be good at math or science. It just put this idea in my head, which I don't think is unrelated to the fact that I ended up migrating to speech and hearing sciences a few years later. I ended up in a master's program, as I told you, and I wrote a paper for Professor Art Niemöller in acoustical engineering. And he scribbled in the margin of the paper, you should think about getting a PhD. And I thought, that's totally ridiculous. I'm going to go be a clinical audiologist. I'm not the kind of person who goes and gets a PhD. But something in there must have stuck, because 2 years later, I found myself in a PhD program. And fast forward another few years, I started to work at 9X Verizon, and I got offered my first promotion into management. And Ed Thomas, who was the executive vice president of the organization, called me into his office and said, we want to give you this promotion. And I said, I don't really think I'm prepared to do that job. I'm not ready for that. And he kind of scratched his head and looked at me like I had landed from Mars. Because, of course, if you read the research, you'll know it is a unique attribute amongst women when they get offered a promotion to actually question whether or not they're capable of doing that job. All the study shows that men who are offered or actually go after promotions only have to feel like they possess 50 to 75% of the job qualifications for them to feel like they can do it. Women need about 150%. So it was very odd for him to hear me say that. But again, this guy saw something in me and was ready and willing to hold up a mirror to me and say, this is what I see when I look at you. And those moments are incredibly important, incredibly important. And so the two lessons that I take away from that are, number one, listen to those messages that are coming from the people around you. They could be your bosses, they could be your friends, they could be anybody. But when people tell you what they see when they look at you, don't discard it. Tuck it away. We'll come back in a couple of years. Opportunity surrounds you. I just sat at the last panel and heard about this. It was a different expression. The expression I like is, it's a jungle gym, not a ladder. How many of you feel like you know where you're headed in terms of your career? You know what you want to do? Raise your hands. Okay. Yes, I'll ask the inverse. We'll get a lot of hands. How many people are not sure what they want to do? Okay. So the good news for all of you guys is I don't think that matters, because for those of you who raised your hand and said you do know, I can fairly certainly guarantee that very few of you will actually end up doing what it is you think you want to do, and that's fine. And for those of you who are not sure, that's totally fine, because there isn't one way up, and it's almost never a linear projection. But what that means is that you really have to keep your eyes and ears open to the opportunities that are around you. You know, the word opportunistic has a kind of pejorative meaning, but I don't think it should. It means when opportunity either comes right in front of you or is in your peripheral vision, go for it, because that's the way these careers happen. They don't happen in a linear way, okay? So I want to switch gears and talk about leadership. And I want to start by the leadership lessons that I learned by just being in the experience. And the first is that leadership is a choice, not a title. Leadership through titles is what is referred to as positional power. Getting people to do things because they have to, because you have a title and a position over them. But true leadership What really represents a leader is somebody who can take people to places that they would not otherwise go by themselves when you have no positional power over them. That's what true leadership is. And there are a lot of ways to inhabit that, and you may feel like you're early in your career, but I think it's great for you to think about it now. So a couple of things that I learned along the way. First, step into the leadership void. And I'm sure you've all had this experience. I can remember very early on in my career sitting in a meeting with 3 or 4 of my colleagues, and we were being very collegial and collaborative. And we were trying to plan something, and there was a lot of talk, and we weren't getting anywhere, and it was driving me crazy. It was like enough collaboration and talk, we have to actually decide something and move forward. And none of us had any power over the others. And I remember just sort of getting to the point where I couldn't stand it anymore. And I said, okay, so we've been talking for a couple of hours. Let's do this. And much to my amazement, the rest of the people in the group said, okay. So it's that kind of experience where if you have the internal sense that it's time to just make a move, and you feel like nobody else is stepping up, just step up. It's the earliest form of leadership. Some of the thinkers about leadership will call that operational leadership, which is one form of way of being a leader. It's the people who just know how to get things done as an operational leader. But another aspect of leadership, and I love this, and this is written by a guy, so this is in the soft science, which is lead from the heart. And what that really means is what true leaders do is they develop a connection with the people that they're trying to lead and understand what they're about. What are they trying to accomplish? Because it's only with that kind of a trust that people are willing to follow you. The best definition I've heard of leadership yet is a leader is someone who other people follow. It's incredibly simple, but the truth of the matter is that if you stand up and you're a great visionary and you've got great strategy and you're talking to everyone about what you want to do, but you turn around and nobody's following you, you're not a leader. Okay, so what makes people follow other people? There's a whole science of this, and part of it comes from helping people experience who they are when they're with you. And one of the most rewarding things that I found in my leadership journey was as I moved from job to job, oftentimes in very different parts of the company, having nothing from a content perspective related to what I did before, there were a slew of people who said, can I go with you? Can I leave what I'm doing now? They're not getting a promotion. I'm the one getting a promotion. But they wanted to move over where I was going because we had established a trust. Because I understood who they were and what was motivating them. Sometimes that's called network leaders. The people who can establish trust in an organization, which is what makes organizations function well. So you can be a network leader without necessarily being in the highest position in the organization. And then there is strategic leadership, the people who can actually articulate a vision in such a way that other people in the organization say, I want to go where that person is going, right? And in order to do that, you have to have passion, right? And you have to be a good storyteller. You have to be able to get people excited to want to get on the train that you're on. So those are sort of different experiences, different aspects of leadership. There's also a lot of actual research that's been done on leadership models over time. And so if you're interested in this, look up a guy named Michael Maccabee, M-A-C-C-O-B-Y. He's written fantastic books on leadership. And he has pointed out that what makes for the most effective leaders has actually changed over the course of history. The actual way he says it is that the kinds of most effective leadership change as a result of the dominant mode of production in society. So let me explain what that means. One leadership model, to use sort of current terminology, is that your power base or your leadership platform is based on being the smartest person in the room. Okay? That model was predominant during the agrarian period of time, where leadership models were based on the master apprenticeship model. There were small family farms, family businesses, blacksmiths, and so on. And that was the leadership model. And by definition, the person in the master role was the person with the expertise. And the person in the apprentice model was the person who wanted to learn what the master knew. That was the leadership model in those days. And there are plenty of people who practice that leadership platform today, but what's the fundamental flaw with that being your leadership platform? Just yell it out. Your connection to others. Okay, say more.
By following you, and maybe just being a smart person doesn't necessarily entail that.
Okay, that's a really interesting comment, that it's hard to find yourself when you're totally focused on trying to sort of emulate the person who's the master. What else? If your power base is based on...
You can never be the master.
What's that?
Always know more than you.
Say it again?
You can never be better than him or her because they will always be the smartest one in the room.
Right. Your power base is based on the fact that you know more than everybody else in the organization. So who are you going to hire? People who know less than you. Because if you don't, if this is your leadership base, then you're going to destroy your leadership base by bringing in people who know more than you. And of course, that's not a very effective mode of leadership. Now, it doesn't mean you never want to be the smartest guy in the room. It just means you don't want that to be your entire leadership platform. So a second model of leadership came during the industrial era, which is the command and control model. Okay, this was born out of the military model in World War I and II, and the buildup of the industrial complex, factory floors and so on. This is a very hierarchical model. I know we use the word bureaucracy as a dirty word, but there are times where bureaucracies are actually incredibly important in order to manage very large, complex organizations where everybody needs to know what their role is or the whole system doesn't work. Factory floors, as they were originally designed, everybody had their job. Certainly in the military complex, you can't have decision-making happening all over or people die. Right? So there was a reason why command and control became a very dominant mode of leadership. And in fact, it persists today in very large organizations. But one of the weaknesses of the command and control model is that by definition, information is held at the top of the organization. Because you don't want decision makers at every level of the organization. You don't want the soldiers in the field individually deciding what to do. Right? Same thing on factory floors. So command and control is certainly an appropriate form of leadership or a leadership platform, but you have to kind of understand the puts and takes. And in the digital age, it's really more the master facilitator model that is becoming the more predominant style of leadership. Because in the digital age, it's almost always the case that the knowledge workers, the computer scientists, the application developers, the UX designers, and so on, know more than the people running the organization. In every organization I've always run, everybody in the organization always knew more than I did. And so the job of the leader is to facilitate knowledge transfer in order to create new value in the knowledge economy. And so the skill that's most important there is not being the smartest guy in the room, and is not necessarily command and control, but to create an environment in which people are willing to share the knowledge that they have in order to create new value. So none of these are all or none, and you may have aspects of each of them and circumstances in each of them, but it's important to be aware of the different ways in which you can embody leadership and which ones you're more comfortable with and not, and which ones are more appropriate depending on what you're trying to get done. So one other way to think about it, this happens to be one of my favorite, is sort of what comes most naturally to you. What's sort of an authentic style of leadership for you? And so there are people who we describe as leading from the front. Okay, these are the people who, when you charge the hill, they go first, they're carrying the flag, and an entire army of people is following them up the hill. When they get to the top, everybody realizes that they got there because the leader was in front. Okay? And then there's leading from behind, which I've heard discussed in many ways, especially in some of the political conversation these days, as being like a bad thing. But there's a wonderful quote from Nelson Mandela about leaders are like shepherds who are encouraging their flocks to move forward, identifying who is good at what, and moving the masses forward from behind. And so leading from behind, you're charging up that hill, the leader is behind, cheerleading, identifying the people who create value, and you all get to the top and the leader is the last one up. And then there's the model of leading from the middle. And in this model, the whole team gets to the top of the hill and nobody knows exactly why, they just know they got there. And I think my feeling is that everybody has something in here that comes more naturally to them. You can't take somebody who really likes to lead from the front and say, well, you really need to lead from behind, because it's not authentic. And so I would just ask you to think about this as you think about yourself and what comes most naturally. These are all equally as good. There's nothing better than another. But I do believe that people come at these things very differently. And so you have to ask yourself which one of these platforms feels most comfortable to me, because that's the one where I can be authentic. That's the one where people are going to trust me in the sense of leading them to a place that they want to go. So let's switch gears for a minute, talk about technology, and then we'll get back to why I think we need technology leaders who are women, which is what the Whitney Initiative is all about. How many of you have heard of who Ray Kurzweil is? Okay, go look him up. Kurzweil. This is an absolutely brilliant scientist, inventor, and thinker. I've been in many panels recently where people talk about we are in, as if it's a revelation, we're in an age of a sort of accelerating change. Technology is changing faster and faster. Ray Kurzweil made that observation about 30 years ago when he plotted the rate of technology change since the beginning of time, starting with fire, and made the observation that we've been on an exponential curve since the beginning of time. This is another way to show it, which shows the time it takes for new technology adoption to reach the masses around the world. So when the invention of the telephone came, from the time it was invented, it took about 25 years until more than 50% of the world's population was using it. Mobile phones took about 10 years, the internet 4 or 5 years. We're on an accelerating curve. But Kurzweil made an unbelievable observation, which I related back. You heard Bonnie John earlier, and she made the comment that computer science is not just about computers, it's about people and about how we interact with technology. So here's what Kurzweil said. Kurzweil made the observation that human biology, as we exist physically in the world, hasn't changed much since the cavemen and women. We kind of look approximately the same. His observation is that technology is the evolution of human biology. Okay? And if technology is the evolution of human biology, it's not at all surprising that the learnings about how we interact with this technology are critical to the future of not just how we live our daily lives, how we get information, how we calculate, through data analytics, but actually how we're going to live as human beings from a biological perspective. You all know that technology is entering our bodies, right? Pacemakers, cloned organs, little computers that float around your body and can monitor your blood levels. And Kurzweil talks about something called the singularity, which he says is happening sometime in the next, I think, 20 years or so, where from a biological perspective will be 50% technology and 50% biology. And so the question of who is engaged in designing this technology and who is engaged in leading the way about which technologies we invest in and which ones we don't, and whether the future of computers is the cyborg computers taking over the world, or in fact, technology actually significantly improving the quality of our health and well-being, depends in part on who are in those leadership roles. And that's why, among many other reasons, I think it's absolutely critical, if I could be dramatic, critical to the future of the human race, that we get at least equal representation of one gender into leadership positions. And we're not going to get them into leadership positions unless we get them in the pipeline. So you're all familiar with this data. I just look at it and say, what's wrong with this picture? The chart on the left basically shows the decreasing percentage of women pursuing undergraduate degrees in computer science and related technology fields, and the chart on the right shows the increase in the job market, in the tech market versus everything else. And so I can only look at that and say, what is wrong with this picture? We're not going where the puck is going, to use that expression. And so I'm going to come full circle back to where I started, which is, what are we going to do about that? And what is a company like Verizon and other companies, and what are senior executive women like myself and others going to actually do to turn this thing around? And so collectively, with a great partnership between Cornell Tech, which I'll talk more about in a second, the City University of New York. How many people here go to the City University of New York? Okay. And a family of companies starting with Verizon, but including Accenture, Citigroup, IBM, Xerox, Grand Central Tech, JPMC, AppNexus, and there are more coming, all putting together their resources with a commitment to try to encourage more women like yourself to enter the fields of computer science and technology, but also to try to grease the skids for you once you're in terms of making it more of what we like to call a glide path rather than an obstacle course for you to continue in your studies and make your way successfully into your careers. And so there are programs including innovative courses to encourage more young women to start along the path that you have already started on, scholarships and fellowships to help you from a financial perspective, a cadre of fantastic high-tech internships at the kinds of companies that I talked about, a community of women starting at the undergraduate and graduate level, but also including senior executive women from around the New York area, and opportunities for you to get engaged in your piece of paying it forward and paying it backward. Let me talk for a second about Cornell Tech. Cornell Tech, as you probably know, is a graduate school in New York offering both master's and PhDs in a variety of fields, in computer science, engineering, in a very tech-oriented business degrees, in law, in healthcare, in media, and so on. And they are Cornell Tech is very dedicated to quite a number of things, and one of them is to supporting women to become the next generation of leaders in the digital age. They are very committed to training programs that really integrate the education that the students get with the industry leaders from a place like New York. And so the courses that are offered there are crawling with industry leaders from companies, large and small, entrepreneurial companies and so on, that are integrated into the curriculum so that you're really learning not only the technical skills, but the business know-how that will help you when you get out into the real world, and a very tight network of mentors from alumni from Cornell, from these industry leaders, and so on. And of course, the scholarships and fellowships for women. So it is a fascinating and fantastic program. And they are open for applications. They have rolling admissions, they're open now, and sitting in the back of the room is Diane Levitt, who is the Senior Director for the K-12 program at Cornell Tech, and has cards and things like that. So if you're interested in finding out more about it, you can approach Diane afterwards. So let me just finish by telling you my 3 pieces of advice. First and foremost, learn how to be a great storyteller. I started school saying I wanted to be a teacher. I said then I didn't, and then of course I went on to teach. And as I think it was Bonnie John who said earlier, it's all about communicating your story. It's all about teaching. I think teach and ye shall lead is what I think. Because being a leader is about being able to educate the people around you about why they should care about getting on your bandwagon and following along. And to do that, you have to be a great storyteller. Stories have beginnings and middles and ends, and it takes practice to do it, so practice. In front of the mirror, in front of your family, practice being a great storyteller. Be passionate. You've heard that a bunch of times throughout the day. I'll tell you from the perspective of being a parent, you're not going to get up and leave those cute little kids at home and go off to work if it's not something you feel passionate about. And you're not going to get anybody to follow you as a leader if you don't come at the job with passion. So that's critically important. And last but not least, be humble. Doesn't mean to constantly have the imposter syndrome and so on. But remember that whatever you're doing, even when you're the lead senior executive of a 7,000 person organization, that's just one job. That's just one job at the organization. You happen to be good at it, and so they put you in that position. But all the other jobs are just as important to get things done. So you got to understand that in your role as you move up. Just remember that you need the team around you as much as they need you to lead. And with that, I will open it up for a Q&A, or yes? Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sherry's. I was wondering, who was your inspiration while you were on your career path?
So I would say, in my experience, and I've listened to that question throughout the day, this may be generational, I'm not sure. I didn't really have a mentor along the way, but what I did do was learn incredible amounts from the leaders that were around me. I am sort of a perennial student, and so I watched. I can think of leaders throughout. I wouldn't call them inspirations or mentors, but I watched people and what they could do and what was working. You know, you can also learn from watching what you don't want to do, from things that don't work. And I learned sort of through osmosis and by example. There's something called shadow of the leader, which is, I've learned over the years, the strongest organizational dynamic principle on the planet. And that is that organizations tend to start to behave as their leader behaves, whether they're conscious of it or not. And whether that's a good thing or not, that's what happens. You start to behave as your leader behaves. And so if you're aware of that, both when you're emulating or deciding you don't want to emulate, but also when you're in the leadership role and you start to observe how your organization is behaving, well, why is everybody doing it that way? The first thing to do is look in the mirror and say, what is it that I'm doing that is generating that kind of behavior? Because they're following your lead. So I think my experience and my 2 cents is pay attention to the people around you and their leadership styles, and then decide who it is you want to learn from and who it is you want to, who you want to emulate and who you don't want to emulate.
Hi, Lester Hoffman, diversity expert. one of the things that isn't spoken about a lot is that there's a diversity of people who can be part of the decision-making process about the kinds of things you were speaking about before, Judy. The fact that it isn't just technology people and other kinds of leaders. There's also people in all the other humanistic areas. There's people in history, cultural studies, literature, languages, and the like, who come to the futuristic viewpoint with a very different worldview than Ray Kurzweil, who comes from, I think, a fairly narrow perspective, even if he is correct about the timeline. So I think we have to ask ourselves, both in corporations and also in academia, are we bringing in the perspective of humanities and humanistic thinking and historical and cultural awareness? Just as we have to ask ourselves, are we taking into account the cultural awareness of different parts of the world as well?
Yeah. So I certainly agree with that. Diverse teams, if you saw that video, you saw Walden Cadham, who's the CEO of Verizon, say we need a diversity of thought, which comes from a diversity of background.
Exactly.
And that doesn't just mean gender, and it doesn't just mean race or ethnicity. It means socioeconomic and global and so on. And also, even in a smaller scale, on teams you have designers who are really artists, and you have computer science who are systems thinkers, and you have HR people who are putting teams together from a different perspective. So that's absolutely true. And one of the wonderful things about Michael McAbee, who writes about leadership in organizations, is this is his training. He's a Fortean-trained psychoanalyst with a master's degree in anthropology as well as a business degree. And so he thinks about leadership from the psychological perspective, from an anthropological perspective, and from a business perspective. So I agree with that. Other questions or comments?
We have time for one more, and we have one more.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask if you're on Twitter and how people can connect with you rather than LinkedIn. And is there any way we can read some of your articles about leadership and stuff like that, or somewhere where people just can, ask you questions about it so they can be better and become leaders sometime?
Absolutely.
Soon?
Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to confess, I'm on Twitter, but like sort of in name only. But Diane Thomas says she's going to teach me how to tweet. I am there. I think it's Dr. Judith Spitz. I should have said, if you didn't see it, there's email associated with Whitney, just as a general mailbox, which is whitney@cuny.edu or wit-ny@cornell.edu. My email is judith.spitz@verizon.com. That's easier. I wish somehow in the last bunch of years I had time to publish papers, but I don't. I speak on the subject all the time, but I'm happy to chat with you.
Any internships that you may recommend that we can follow up with and share?
Did you say internship?
Internships.
Bingo.
Thank you.
So we have in the Whitney program 30 some odd really fantastic internships available now for this coming summer. So if you are I will say this is starting with CUNY, so I'm not sure how many non-CUNY students we have, but if you're a CUNY student,
What is the name again? The internship?
so if you're a woman in CS or related fields, and some of the internships, you don't even have to be that, go on the CUNY website. They have a landing page that's Whitney, WITNY, I'm trying to think of the exact URL. If you Google it on CUNY, you'll find it. And if you go on that page, one of the links is internships. And if you click on there, you're going to go to CUNY's website called Lever, which has all the internships, and you're going to see all the internships associated with Whitney. Many of them have been filled, but many of them haven't. And so please, you can email me or go on that website, because they're just, we've got internships at IBM Watson. Internships at IBM Watson. We have internships at JPMC, at AOL, at Huffington Post, at Citi, at Grand Central Tech, which is a very hot incubator, internships at Cornell Tech, working with Professor Stedman.
There's a bus that comes from, that goes from the city to Watson.
Well, these are in the city.
Watson.
This is Watson's location in the city. So just fantastic opportunities.
So, thank you.
Okay.